I'm going to read tonight from it's my most current novel, but it's the story of Eugene Miles, a man who claims to have lived in various incarnations for nearly 1,200 years, once as Oscar Wilde's cat, all the while looking to reunite with Gaia, the love of his life that he lost as a young cutpurse in Seville in the 9th century. Okay, so The Most Beautiful of All Possible Worlds is the name of this chapter. Do not tell me life is short. With the benefit of my considerate experience, or should I say despite it, I'm still willing to buy a little hope if you dress it up right. That life is beautiful, that God forgives or even exists, that people are basically good. I still want to believe. Tell me that life is meaningful and you've got my ear. Tell me that life is a journey and I'll nod in agreement. But try convincing me that that journey is short and you've lost me. That's one cliche I can't abide. If you think life is short, just wait. One of these days, it won't end for you. It'll just keep going, and you'll see that life is not a breathless sprint to the grave, gone in a heartbeat, but an odyssey that stretches on into eternity. Once it starts, it never ends, not even if you want it to. I should know. I've gone by other names, Uric, Pietro, Kiri, York, and Whiskers, among others. Currently, I answer to the name of Eugene, though the attendants here at Desert Greens call me Mr. Miles. In June, I turned 106 years old. Wow, you'll say, what a full life, impressive. What's your secret? But the fact is, I'm terrified. Not because I'm afraid to die, because I'm afraid to live again. Of all my lives, this has been the longest. At turns, the most rewarding and the most fruitless, the most satisfying and the most trying, and accounting for the abiding awareness and attendant weight of all my previous follies and failures and misgivings, the most exhausting. So do not tell me life is short. I first came to be on the Iberian Peninsula in the town of Seville, or Ishbilia as it was known, during the golden age of Abd al-Rahman III in Al-Andalus. If you read their history, you probably know something about Hispania under the Moors, how it was a global seat of wisdom, a paradise for scholars and poets and artists, philosophers, historians, and musicians, how Arabic was the language of science, mathematics, and astronomy, and medicine. You've likely heard about the wondrous architecture of the mosques with their flowing arabesques and honeycombed vaults, their dome tops echoing the hypnotic surahs of the Quran. You've probably heard about the great walled Alcazabas and the splendor of the riads and gardens. But I digress. Now I live here at Desert Greens, an elder care facility in Lucerne Valley. I've been here for 11 years. It's a nice enough place, I suppose, though there exists no actual greens on the premises, unless you count that blighted buffalo grass on the west end of the facility. There are a few picnic tables, 4 to be exact, out there amongst the thirsty palms, which, depending on the direction you choose to face, confer views of the Ord, Granite, or San Bernardino Mountains. The craggy Ords and granites brown all year round. It's a stark landscape, yes, but a beautiful one, and timeless like me. I still get around well enough with a little help here and there. I can go to the bathroom on my own, or walk down the corridor to the common area, or the cafeteria, or the aforementioned greens, where a more sociable soul than myself might find a game of dominoes, or even chess if he were so inclined. Were it my wish to learn to paint landscapes or achieve computer competency, I could do that too here at Desert Greens, but I don't. There is no denying a slight antiseptic air here at the Greens. Don't imagine it as a hospital or an institution exactly. I have my own quarters, albeit small, populated with my own things, though if 12 centuries have taught me anything, it's how to travel light. Thus, I possess comparatively little next to most of the tenants. 2 shelves worth of cherished books, from Virgil to Proust to O'Connor, and of course, my dear Oscar. A few dozen history texts, ranging from the Greeks to the Romans to the Moors to the Americans, and old Gideon's Bible swiped decades before from the Oviatt Hotel in downtown Los Angeles, along with a half-dozen jigsaw puzzles at any given time, and a shoebox half full of keepsakes, including my tags and medals from the war. A spherical rock I found along the Oregon coast on my honeymoon with Gladys. a handwritten letter from one of my high school history students 20 years after I taught her, along with the bone-handled jackknife my father gave me when I was 7 years old. The attendants here at Desert Greens are invariably cheerful, though most of them speak to me with that cloying condescension one might employ with a toddler or a puppy. I play along with them to some degree, though despite my vintage, I am still quite sharp, an observation staff members share with me weekly. Joan, Henry, Alice, Marguerite, they're all very professional, which is to say attentive, even-tempered, if not consistently measured in their distance. While the others are fastidiously unyielding in their professionalism, which is fine by me, Marguerite has been known to harmlessly flirt with me on occasion, a kindness I oblige as if it flatters me, though in truth, nothing could arouse my ardor at this point, not with Gladys beyond my reach, or Gaia, if you will. Aside from Marguerite's occasional playful antics, the rest of the staff here at Desert Greens maintains a polite deference and patient disposition that never quite achieves warmth. While it is true that my tenure here in the Desert Greens I have been far from a gadabout, and for the most part a certifiable recluse, I am not unacquainted with my fellow denizens. To wit, there is Irma McCleary across the hall, who smells of wilting gardenias in the inside of pill bottles. I would put Irma's years somewhere between 85 and 90, although decorum necessitates that I never solicit a woman's age. An interesting fact about Irma: her hair is quite literally blue, and I don't mean grayish blue, rather somewhere between baby and cornflower blue. Only recently did I discover that this fact is not owing to some unfortunate mishap involving off-brand hair dye or unforeseen chemical reaction, but owing instead to a personal preference. As it turns out, Irma willfully cultivates her azure hair for reasons I'm not given to understand. Unerring in her politeness, though she's been calling me Benson for nearly a decade now, Irma is quick with a compliment, as recently as last week, commending my choice of moccasin-style slippers. 2 doors down from me resides Herman Billett. Herman is an unnaturally lean, bullet-headed old buzzard who is about as hale and hearty as a paper sack full of cobwebs. The next stiff breeze could well be the end of Herman. While Herman might appear to be even more decrepit than yours truly, I have it on good authority that the man has not yet lived to see his 90th birthday. Mr. Billett is just a babe still, though you wouldn't know it to see him wandering the hallways, stooped and listless, Danish crumbs ringing his slackened jaw. My exchanges with Herman have been limited mostly to assisting him in locating the commissary or helping him find his way back to his quarters from said commissary. More than once, he has mistaken me for his son, and once for a former business partner, a certain Phil Jacoby, who I've come to learn died an untimely death some 40-odd years ago. In the next corridor over resides Bud Brewster, he of the ceaseless fly-fishing adventures and intolerant politics, who calls himself a patriot and claims to have fought in the 118th Infantry Division, though no such outfit ever existed. Despite my own service, I have no interest in exposing Bud Brewster as a fraud, and even less interest in talking to him. Across the hall from Bud Brewster abides Iris Perlman, a charming, if not overly talkative woman who's cultivated an unimaginably large family, likes nothing more to inform people on the particulars of their existence. To wit, there is a daughter Judith in Fort Worth, a retired school administrator. Judith's husband Mac, a retired oil executive who converted to Judaism 37 years ago. Great-grandson Levi was just accepted at Brown University. His mother Barbara, a former Miss Schenectady, is over the moon by this acceptance. Then there is Iris's son Adam, a playwright allegedly of some renown, and his wife Natalie, and their 3 sons and 2 daughters, Todd, Mira, David, Hannah, and Caleb, in descending order. We're only grazing the surface here, but I'm sure you get the idea. In the sum of my exchanges with Iris, which total 4, I have contributed all of 12 words. But at least Iris Perlman is not nosy like Mrs. Messenger, who sees fit to entrust me with any and every shred of gossip she can amass. A litany of dubious particulars comprising sexual innuendo, marital complications, deaths, near deaths, projected deaths, alleged UTIs, and colorectal surgeries. As an intensely personal sort, I could never abide gossip. I find Mrs. Messenger to be, in a word, odious, and to be avoided even more emphatically than Mrs. Perlman, who means no harm. There are dozens of others here at Desert Greens, too many to catalog. Thus, I'll spare you a further inventory. Apologies if these assessments of my peers seem unkind. I harbor these venerable souls no grudge whatsoever. Like me, many of my elderly neighbors live in relative isolation, receiving infrequent visitors. Their lives have become very small. I feel for them, I do. But not one of them carries a light in their eyes that suggests they have ever lived before to remember it. Some of them can hardly remember their own names. I want to pity them, but the truth is I envy them, because most of them will probably win the death lottery. A few more years of habitually eating their big meals early in the day, collecting newspaper clippings for the sons and daughters that never call on them, and watching the 5 o'clock news, and the 6 o'clock news, and the 7 o'clock news. Most of them will likely enjoy the opportunity to call it quits, while I fear I am destined to go on living again and again. I've not received a visitor in 8 years. Such is my desire for isolation that I have zero interest in talking to anyone beyond my perfunctory exchanges with the staff. Instead, I keep to myself, confounding my meaningless but endlessly stubborn life force. I soothe my restlessness with jigsaw puzzles, depicting cats sprawled on bookshelves, lighted cityscapes, national parks, famous book covers, anything between 5 and 1,500 pieces that doesn't feature a lot of sky, for a puzzle sky always vexes me. It is not that I take any joy in jigsaw puzzles beyond the small satisfaction attending their completion. It is simply that they keep me occupied and focused, buoyed to the one existence I hope to be my last, though I know such hope is foolish. Understand, I am not depressed, only resolved to my isolation because it takes the least amount of effort. My lone aspiration is to ride this life out, and it seems that the less connecting I do, the less I reach out to the world, the less I'm inviting future possibilities. So this is where I skip ahead, but it goes pretty smoothly, but there's more stuff about Gaia in there. I'm not going to read it. Relative to some of my other embodiments, my life as a cat wasn't bad at all, at least not those years I spent with Oscar. It was much as you might imagine. I lounged, I stretched, I sunned myself upon the windowsill when there was any sun to be had in Chelsea. I was well fed and had the lavish attention of Oscar's affections at my disposal. Nothing small, neither winged nor legged, crawled, slinked, scurried, or buzzed about my proximity that I didn't have my way with it, and I most assuredly had my way. I had absolute dominion over the flat and over my Oscar. Beyond grooming myself and terrorizing insects and having my chin scratched, had I not possessed the knowledge of my former selves and future aspirations, my life might have been idyllic. The blessing and the curse of my 6 years with Oscar was in that morbidly sensitive, oft misunderstood, fanciful young poet I had at last relocated Gaia. It was her. It was actually my beloved Gaia, repersonified. It was sheer torture to resist Oscar's magnetism, but I had to, or my cleanliness might have landed me on the street. I developed tools to distract myself, tick-like habits such as circling the room for hours on end before taking my rightful place in Oscar's lap, or sprawling upon his writing desk while he fussed over his poems. Only by willing myself not to suffocate him had I managed to become more cat-like and aloof. Though believe me, such behavior ran contrary to my instinct to smother him with my attentions. Thus, I could not call Oscar a friend, strictly speaking, and certainly not a lover. To Oscar, I was a companion at best, and some days merely an obligation. For it was Oscar who said famously that cats are only put on this earth to remind us that not everything has a purpose. If only could have intimated that my impetus was singular, to possess him wholly and completely. To connect with another wholly and authentically is all I have ever wanted in any of my incarnations. Without the other, deprived of meaningful connection, we are ciphers at best, and at worst we are invisible. To be seen, to be accepted, warts and all, that was my greatest aspiration for 1,200 years. To be adored for my flaws, to be loved unconditionally. And with Oscar, I had come close. Oh, whiskers, he would say, scratching behind my ear in a moment of abstraction. Fountain pen poised above the empty page, a dab of blue ink beating upon the tip. My precious, how simple your life must be, you rascal. How easy to manage your emotions, your expectations, to govern your desires and simply act on them without judgment or consequence. Of course, Oscar had no idea. He could not see that I was Europe or that he was Gaia, but that was immaterial so far as my immediate objective was concerned. Despite our star-crossed physical manifestations, setting aside those cursed feline limitations that would not allow me to sing my plaintive song in a tongue that Oscar might fully comprehend, I was still Oscar's muse, for a brief period anyway. I was the apple of Oscar's eye. You must understand that I was selfish in love, that once I had captured Oscar's affection, I was constitutionally incapable of sharing it with another, for I was determined to be his one and only for all my days in Chelsea. And I was almost there. Oscar doted on me, confessed his innermost fears to me, scratched the underside of my chin, my belly, called me his precious. Sometimes, when I sensed his tempers were agreeable, I dared to demand his attention, even preened if the mood was right, strutting across his ink-strewn pages until he gathered me up in his arms. Whiskers, my precious, he would say, guiding his delicate fingers down my spine. Does there exist a more magnificent creature than you? Oh, but don't think I don't see it. You are a vapid and vain little devil who cares not a whit for anything beyond his own comfort and convenience. But you are magnificent, and nobody can deny that. Of course, Oscar had me all wrong. If I was vain, it was only to win his attention. If I seemed vapid, it was only his inability to grasp the depths of my emotions. My singular focus in life was Oscar, and Oscar alone. But what did I care if he misunderstood me, so long as I was his precious? Many a night I slept curled beside his pillow, listening to him mutter and murmur in his sleep, hoping to hear my name. I was not by a stretch Oscar's only suitor. Oh no, there were many, but I could contend with my human competitors, for Oscar was dishonest with them. He did not trust them the way he trusted me. How could he when the little harlots were loyal to no one? Only with me was Oscar ever truly honest, truly vulnerable. Thus I tolerated my human rivals, even employed my cloying charms on them if I thought it would get me a spot on the bed between them. It was a good life until everything fell apart. He was a plug ugly Tom, big and ungainly, a homely shade of gray, speckled black with dead green eyes and a long, regal striped tail, which comprised his only real attribute. And boy, did he flaunt it, whipping that thing around like a boa, hoisting it magnanimously in his wake, curling it elegantly upon the windowsill, furling and furling it as the sun hit his ugly face just so, even sweeping the useless appendage gently across Oscar's face. Imagine! So average, so utterly unextraordinary was he, a useless lump where pest control was concerned. Why, I once watched a cockroach scurry right over his useless tail, and the scoundrel did not so much as budge from his place on the settee. The Tom was torpid in his daily routine, careless in his hygiene, altogether unworthy of affection, let alone an affection so delicate and sublime as Oscar's. But the greatest insult of all was the name that Oscar bestowed upon the interloper. Precious, he called him. Precious, my pet name, my rightful and preferred name, as I never favored the moniker of Whiskers, which was so novel, so frivolous. Precious, the name Oscar summoned upon those willful occasions, upon those wistful occasions when he found himself stymied by his literary endeavors. The name he lavished upon me as I lay beside him in bed, purring to my heart's content. Precious, wecious widow wubber, he would say to that big clod who would invariably advance with his graceless plod and make a show of that useless tail of his, swishing and wagging it in Oscar's face, sounding that ugly guttural purr, blunt and indelicate as a locomotive. I was incorrigible to the Tom when I acknowledged him at all. I hissed at his nearness and brandished my claws should he dare cross my path. Oscar took his side more often than not. Whiskers, you incorrigible puss. Make nice this instant. But of course, I dared to ignore these decrees, for never would I confer anything but contempt upon my rival. By all rights, the Tom might have bullied me, the big lout, but he didn't. He might have begrudged me my dwindling share of Oscar's affections, but he didn't. He might have lorded his supremacy over me at every juncture, but instead, he was a portrait of aloofness. He was no more threatened or intrigued by me than the moth that wavered with impudence in front of his ugly face. And for this, I hated him even more. That Oscar would ever take in this graceless simpleton, that lumbering clodpole, that he should endeavor to name the beast precious. Well, suffice it to say that I had never lived to know such betrayal. And yet, I was powerless. I had no choice but to forgive Oscar. Worse, I loved him more than ever. I loved him more with every perceived slight, every failure to notice me. So hopelessly compelled was I to be his or anyone else's one true light. Thank you.